November 3rd, 2020. Do you know what that date means? I mean, do you even know what today is? Because we're in probably day like Elon Musk baby of quarantine. Yeah, you figure out what that number is when you figure it out. I have no idea. But that is the day of the 2020 presidential election. You know, imagine a time where that was considered the most all-encompassing, emotional, riveting, high-stakes event that was going to happen this year. I mean, I was damn near having a mental breakdown just trying to prepare for the ugliness and craziness and unpredictability of that. So obviously, Miss Rona had other plans for us, and we have been diligently trying to kind of like get our spirits in check, get this health center in check, get this country, get these stimulus checks in check, as we kind of like get past this pandemic. But I have an inkling that as soon as we get past this, we'll revert to what was supposed to be taking up all of our attention, which is getting this orange monstrosity out of the White House. I want to disabuse anyone that this show is going to offer a objective viewpoint about him. I figured that for the first episode of What We Gon Do, first of all, welcome to the first episode of What We Gon Do. I got sidetracked by my hatred of Trump, but honestly, I think that I don't want you to think that I am impartial. This is not the New York Times. I want that motherfucker gone. And so I thought that starting with the election as our first kind of meaty topic about how we can divine the future, would be really apropos because we've gone through some of these primaries already, some without real incident. I mean, I did mine here in California, in downtown LA. I took advantage of some of the early voting. I actually had to re-register on site at the polling place at the Ace Hotel. Who knew? Don't know when I'll see that place again. And it was very easy. And so, you know, we had states like Wisconsin and Ohio who have had to kind of endure all of the ramifications of quarantine and coronavirus when trying to execute their primaries. And it gives us a little bit of a taste as to what might happen in November. And I want to understand, like many of you, what we need to anticipate and prepare for that might in any way derail our ability to get this ridiculous idiot out of the White House. You know, I assume that most of you have the same priorities. If you don't, and you're watching this, Jesus wept. I mean, I will not weep for you, but maybe Jesus will. Anyways, I digress. I blaspheme. But I wanted us to take the opportunity to bring together three experts of people who have some relation to elections, either as candidates or as people who actually implement and execute elections, or people who are kind of in the ivory tower of academia, but are trying to translate the values of democracy and representation into real life and to real people. And so I have three really amazing guests this week that I'd like to kind of give you a little bit of a preview of our interviews. First up is Morgan Harper. Now, Morgan Harper is formerly a candidate. She stepped into the 3rd District in Ohio, which encompasses most of Columbus, Ohio, a place that is, you know, ravaged with inequity, obviously gentrification, all the kind of effects that are ravaging most of the places in America. And so she went in to beat a 4-term incumbent named Joyce Beatty. She had no name recognition, no money, and just a wealth of experience and a real drive to make a difference. And she was able to translate that into a competitive campaign that was neck and neck with Joyce up until what was supposed to be their election on March 17th. And then Miss Rona came, and not only was the election hours before moved to April 28th, which if you do the math is like 6 more weeks of campaigning, but also changed to an election that was all mail-in. And so I met Morgan when she was here in LA fundraising. I was so impressed with her. She is amazing. She's the exact spirit of who we want in Congress now. And here's a little snippet of some of what we talked about during our interview. Why did you want to run for Congress, and kind of what did you hope to change?
I mean, I got warnings to not do this, and I couldn't listen to those because, I had early life experiences here that set me on the path to pursue a career in public policy, become a lawyer, and it was all with the vision of serving this community, coming home eventually, and being able to enact what I learned eventually was the systemic change needed to actually make sure everybody gets a fair shot. And looking around, and especially having had the experience in Washington, I worked at the Consumer Financial Protection Bureau and saw what the state of Washington was. And I'm feeling like we have been bought and sold off to corporations and corporate interests. And if we're going to get our country back on track, it's going to take an entirely different style of political leader and leadership, and it has to be grassroots. And I felt so strongly about that. And this is the 3rd district, my home. And I was like, we could be a part of that. And if we're not, one of the youngest congressional districts in the country, one of the lowest income congressional districts in the country, if we're not, and safely Democratic, then no progressive legislation is going to happen. So we went for it, and this should not be controversial. And if it is, then I think it has a lot more to do with everybody wanting to protect the status quo than actually looking about, what's the best thing to move us all forward.
Right. And
March 17th, the Secretary of State and the governor held a few press conferences, the first of which was about a week and a half out, where they announced they were closing Ohio State campus. And, our reaction was, and I went to that press conference actually, and I was like, well, what's the game plan to make sure that these people can still vote, right? I mean, you're going to close the campus, which agree with, but that's, several thousand registered voters who vote on Ohio State campus, and a lot of students who might not be coming back to town. So it was just like the disenfranchisement train started to just really roll.
We'll get into
and it ultimately, the decision was made about a week and a half after that original election date to, and this was the state legislature signing a bill that said, we've got a new date. It's going to be April 28th. There will be no in-person voting unless you have a disability or you're homeless. And it's going to be all mail and absentee. And for a lot of people in Ohio and in the 3rd district, these are not people that usually vote absentee, right? So it's the first time people are even thinking about what it looks like to vote absentee, while they're being told that they have to stay at home because there's an infectious disease that's taking hold of our whole country and could kill them, while they're also learning that they are not going to have a job anymore. And we're going to give you 3 weeks to also make sure you get out and vote. But don't get out. These are people who had given up on the political system, not necessarily regular voters. And everything about this process reinforced the idea that this system is stacked against us. When, really the institutions that you would think, that we know have the resources to do these kinds of things, Democratic Party, the Secretary of State, the governor, the state legislature, if they wanted to greenlight funding for that, they weren't doing it. They were just like, oh, here's our decision on high, and people figure it out. And if, most of the people living here don't figure it out, well, whatever, and we just couldn't accept that. So we really stopped, voting blue no matter who. That mentality has killed us. And we have got to get out of this mindset that just because someone is a Democrat, that they are the person who is best serving us, or that they should not, that there's not another Democratic alternative that's out there. And so I really, think that a lot of people who are more, secure, who have the luxury of just, feeling great that they are voting Democratic. It's like, no, I mean, we have to be holding ourselves and our elected officials to a higher standard. And people need to, I'm thinking as you were talking about one guy who he had requested an application from us to request the absentee ballot. But by the time we had delivered the application and then we were calling to follow up with him to make sure he submitted it and got his ballot, is like, my mom got COVID. Like, I'm done with the voting portion of what I'm thinking about, right? And it's like totally understood. It's sad, but that's where you're at. So 2016 was our closest comp, because that was the last presidential primary. For Franklin County, or for 3rd District in particular, there were over 120,000 people that voted in that 2016 primary, Democratic primary. And this year, with the change to the all mail and absentee and Corona pandemic, we surpassed only 60,000 people,
wow.
A little over 60,000 people who voted in total.
So make sure to check in this week when her full interview drops. It was a really compelling conversation. Morgan, we love you. I'm going to be there in 2 years to make sure this shit happens right the next time. Our next guest was a good friend of mine from Sacramento, Robert Abelon, Robbie, and he is the Deputy Secretary of State of Policy and Planning for the Secretary of State in California. That means that his job is to actually take the different scenarios and policies and plans that might need to be put in place to execute an election underneath whatever is going on with the coronavirus. So the Secretary of State in California actually executes the election. There's 58 counties in California, each of whom have their own independently selected individuals that run the campaign. But the Secretary of State really sets the parameters and is putting in place measures to make sure that we have safe and accessible elections for all voters in California. And so California has already instituted a bunch of reforms that have made it easier to vote, but underneath the craziness that is COVID-19, they're having to imagine all types of different scenarios. So I wanted to talk to him about what are the things that might need to be put in place for this election to happen successfully. And here's what he had to say.
Any Californian now can help us and be our eyes and our ears online, whether it's like a Reddit thread or a Facebook post or a Twitter, like someone just tweeted something out, being able to flag that, send it up the flagpole to us so we can deal with it in real time and hopefully take it down within minutes of it being up.
I actually don't know if I know. Tell me if I'm wrong or right about this. Does one stamp cost 44 cents?
Do you know? The fact that we are still kind of guessing is, it's around 51 cents.
Dang. Okay, it's not even $2 for $1.
There's a little over 20 million registered voters. So that's now over 20 million pieces of mail that will go out to voters just so that they can get their ballot, which is a great thing. So that's amazing. But the thing is, a lot of the people who will be getting it will be voting for the first time by mail. We're still taking a look at how in-person voting will occur. Why we think that's really important is because of, besides the mail ballot, there's still a lot of people who only can vote in person for many other reasons. Some of it are those in the disabled community. If they need assistance, and that's one way to get assistance is by showing up in person and getting voter assistance there. Others, there's language assistance in person at in-person voting locations. So if English isn't the first language for some citizens that are voting, they can get language assistance there to help clarify what is on the ballot. So we have probably roughly another 18 or 19% more voters that we can register to vote and be on the rolls to be ready to vote. But I think that's one of the biggest reasons why we also have offered same-day voter registration. So this past March is the first time anywhere you can go in and vote is also where you can go in and register to vote on the same day. It doesn't sound like much, but people just assume that it's already been happening, but it hasn't. So some of the best features that we have talked about and implemented, it's because we were able to share that information with other states. So states like Colorado, Washington, Oregon have already done a lot of the stuff that we're moving forward with as well. And other states on the East Coast or other practices. So we've been a great communicator with other states. So taking ideas that other counties have that work for them and scaling it up in California has been something that we have been trying to do and make sure that the research is done correctly. So when it's time for game time in California, that it's done right, the counties are ready for it, we're ready for it. And also the voters are ready for it and know that these are options available for them. And like I said, it's a two-way street. So we've kind of picked what's worked great for other states and vice versa. States asking us about, hey, when you implemented this, how did this look like? So these are information that we do share with other states. And then our Secretary of State is part of this coalition of other Secretary of States that share information with each other, share best practices and best ideas. And our Secretary of State, Alex Padilla, is one of those leaders on a nationwide front in sharing that information and also addressing any accessibility barriers that we see in California and using the best practices from around the country, bring it back here into California and kind of put our own spin on it so that it works for California and then implement it. So I think that's one of the things that we've done in the state of California, opening up an office of cybersecurity to combat and give kind of more tools and toolbox for police to counteract that. And probably a couple other things is, like I said, with high turnout, I think information to first-time voters and new voters, we definitely don't want to leave them behind. So first-time voters, letting them know how they can vote, where they can vote, when they can vote.
Pretty ambitious mail-in voting that I think can kind of help us frame the types of measures that prepared to institute to guarantee a safe and high participation election. And can you outline some of that stuff and how it's bolstered things you already had in place?
So before coronavirus.
So make sure to check out me and Robbie's conversation later this week. Last but not least is my girl, Teresa Cunha. She's been a friend of mine for a very long time, and she unfortunately left us in California to attend the Harvard Kennedy School, and now she's at the Ash Center for Democracy and Innovation. I gave her a real hard time about Harvard, so you're just going to have to bear with me on that. Bula bula. But she is at the Ash Center for Democracy and Innovation at the Harvard Kennedy School, and she is going to talk to us about kind of like, what is democracy? You know, like what does democracy mean in this modern era? Not only are we dealing with pandemics, we're dealing with systems that were not necessarily created to have the type of overall participation and enfranchisement that we need. And so kind of talking to her about what does it mean to encourage people to believe in a system that hasn't worked for them? What does it mean to encourage elected officials to respect the rights and needs of people who maybe did not vote for them? And really to kind of see if we're at a place where we need to reimagine this whole system in order to have elected representation and, you know, a system of government that actually governs and functions for us. So I've known her for a very long time. I was at her wedding in San Miguel. Travel, but let's hear what she had to say. So what is your sense? I mean, what is the state of democracy? I mean, is there any kind of like agreed upon opinion of like, how has this been working out?
Well, I mean, I don't think that this is like, so democracy is like, you know, it's like a personal kind of thought, right? Of how one's democracy pertains to them. How do they participate in our democracy? I'll speak for myself. I think it's an imperfect system. We know that there's a lot of challenges to democracy, and it feels like they've been coming up and it's being strained in new ways. And we know through studies that democracy works when people believe in it. And we know that there's increasing evidence that shows that the average citizen is actually pretty distrustful of their democracy, of their government, in ways that was not really seen 20, 30 years ago. I think that people feel really jaded and they don't want to participate in elections. They don't want to go out and vote because they just feel like, you know what, what's the point? I don't have the money, I don't have this. But get this, you know how powerful it is that when you actually show up and you vote and you actually defeat something really big and all the money that could have been spent on it, like that's what it's about. And it's possible. And it takes a lot of people. I think it's really dangerous to think that democracies is like a set thing. I mean, we have so many iterations of what a democracy can look like and work just comparatively throughout the world. I think it's specifically problematic when we just say, these are the rules that we have, and these are the only rules that we should abide from. Our country has changed in so many ways. And if we can't think of evolving the rules of democracy to truly skew towards the voice of people, then I think it's particularly problematic. Our democracy in the United States actually favors the people that show up. And so until you show up, you really have like a negotiating kind of place in our democracy and with our electeds in terms of accountability. And then in terms of like, you know, how do we let the citizenry know that you don't need to have a position on everything. You don't need to be a hyper-informed, you know, individual. Like my criticism towards the higher education space is that like there's kind of this like exclusive language that they communicate with, of which, you know, if you're going to be in the world of democracy, you have to bring it down to where everyone understands. I think we have to, like, you know, and it's not just academia, it's like everyone who's in the ecosystem, we have to kind of check ourselves, making sure that this is accessible language, terminology that we're using, where people have an opinion, can form an opinion about it, and thus vote. Because they don't feel like this is like some exclusionary conversation or decision that's being made that's, you know, over their head.
Well, it's also, these are decisions being made about your life.
You
So
know,
whether you participate or not, you're going to have to be impacted by whatever those decisions.
but
end up being.
sometimes like that's not also like to come out and be like, you should care because this is impacting your life, is also putting all the onus on the voter. What I'm calling for, what I'm calling for, what a lot of people are saying at this moment, we need to be reimagining our democracy. And some of that is also understanding the people who are in the spot to be putting forth ideas and all that. How about you check yourself and frame it in a way that everyone can understand? And anything short of that is, I feel, a planned way to kind of get ideas and things passed without the true input of the community. And I think that's dangerous. I think that's such a healthy part of any democratic system, this outlet that people can organize and can have their say. Even if you're some of those people that are like, open up the country, which I have my own opinions about. To me, what I most care about is that there's a process and that there's a forum of which, or the liberty of which to do that, to assemble. I think that that's very powerful. I wouldn't change that. When you create, the Ash Center's kind of position more is like, just, you got to get people participating. It's not just because of Donald Trump. We think that when you have high levels of participation, it puts so many checks and accountability in ways, in the proper ways, in the ways that you can never really do through rules and kind of protocols and best practices. Like, let's step away from like this thought that like we're asking our leaders to act in the best way because they have some type of moral compass. I think that like we should just double down on the accountability measures of people saying, you're not responding to my needs, we're going to vote you out. I mean, it's just all a ruse. Like, all of these like reasons to keep this integrity, it's all a ruse because studies show otherwise. Like, no one's going out there and like handing in, like,
it's not a nightclub.
It's
like, I'm not showing up like, this is me.
Pulling out ballot envelopes out of their back pocket. Just like, it does not work that way. It isn't, because most people like just are not going to be like, that's not going to be a priority to them. And so to not err on the, how do we make it most accessible for people, then that to me feels like that is a structured way to keep people out. And we know that when you keep people out, I mean, you're going to have certain powers that stay in power.
So that's a little preview of our first week of What We Gon Do. Like I said, this is going to be an opportunity for all of us to gather, uplift some really important voices that are going to help us kind of piece together what the future looks like here in America and the rest of the world. We're going to go through many different topics over the weeks and hopefully meet a lot of exciting people that should be on your radar. Again, I'm Tre Borden. I am really excited to kind of bring this into fruition. This is one of the Corona linings, is that we're going to lean into things that we've never done before, and I appreciate you kind of joining me on this first leg of the journey. So sit tight and enjoy the week.